The Infinite Hallways of the Mind. Yo, what's going on? It's someone that's no one, and welcome back to today's report. Today's report is coming from Johnny Z off Erowid. When this happened, 2002, the drug used was Dextromethorphan at a dose of 500 milligrams. The route of administration was orally. Gender, male. Weight, 140 pounds. Prior experience includes cannabis and alcohol. And the setting is at his friend's house in the basement. So this is a very detailed report of a, first time encounter with DXM. Johnny Z did write it right after he had the experience, and to say the least, there are a variety of things that happened throughout his experience. So this report might be pretty relatable, but I think you guys will enjoy it. So without further ado, let's dive right into it. Last night, I had my first encounter with DXM. Actually, it was my first encounter with any drug besides marijuana and alcohol. I don't have much framework to base my experience on because of this, and so I don't really know exactly how to describe what happened. I will try my best. To begin, my friend Jay and I got our hands on a 500 milligram gel cap of pure DXM for each of us. We were driving home from a city about 50 minutes away from Jay's house, where we were to spend our night. And we took the pills about 20 minutes away from home to shorten our idle time once we arrived. We were also still feeling pretty good from some marijuana we had smoked earlier in the evening, though that high ended about the time we pulled into his driveway. We got to his house at about 2:30 a.m. or so. I had to urinate badly, and Jay was taking his sweet time unlocking and opening the door. So I went around the side of his house to relieve myself in some bushes. I heard his dog in the backyard barking at me, and I heard in the barking a man's voice saying, "Get away from there," very forcefully. I thought Jay's father was at the kennel and saw me violating his yard, and I became embarrassed and finished my business promptly. However, there was not a living thing near the kennel except the dog, and no neighbors to speak of. I was a bit confused by this, but didn't think too much about it after I told Jay about it, who had no explanation. Despite hearing reports of DXM-related nausea, Jay promptly fixed us 2 egg and cheese Hot Pockets, which he put on a single plate. We were planning to watch the film Dazed and Confused, so I went into his room to get it off his DVD shelf. Before I made it to his bedroom, he called me into the bathroom, where he was busy inspecting his eyes. He showed them to me, and I was amazed at how dilated his pupils were. His bright green eyes were now almost entirely black. He said this was a good sign, and I just shrugged, having to take his word for it. Jay started to act a bit strangely, staring at me, breathing deeply, and taking on a vacant/distant look. I, however, felt nothing at this point and went into his room to get the movie. As I turned on his light, though, I had my first inkling of what was to come, as hard to describe as it may have been and continues to be. I turned on the light in his room, and the bulb flickered for a few seconds before staying on. In those few moments of hesitant flickering, however, I nearly reeled, for my entire vision seemed to be an old, scratched film. The blinking light was an old-fashioned reel projector, and the sum of the moment became unreal instantly. My mind even supplied scratches on the film, and things appeared in black and white. The vision lasted only the few short moments it took for the light to decide to stay on, but it had a profound and unnerving effect on me, filling me with a very, very short, but very deep sense of terror. A vague yet terrible fear of the unreality it seemed I was going to be subjected to. As it passed, though, so did the feeling of inebriation and the feeling of fear. I felt that it had been completely in my own imagination, not fueled by any drug, and I convinced myself I was stone sober, which, in retrospect, I very clearly was not. I told Jay of this experience as I looked for the movie, which I was unable to locate. He looked too, not commenting on my momentary hallucination, and couldn't find the movie either, so we resigned ourselves to not watching any movie and made our way downstairs with the food. In the basement, Jay stretched out on the love seat and I sat down next to him on the floor, eating my Hot Pocket. We had dimmed the lights to a very low level. We had been told partial light was best for DXM, and Jay, who has done many drugs but never DXM, said he was starting to really feel it and laid down, breathing heavy. He told me he had a videotape of trippy visuals that he called his Dennis Leary movie in his bedroom, and he gave me specific instructions to find it. He was on crutches, having just had extensive knee surgery, and I myself was in no mood or condition to journey upstairs. I followed his instructions to the letter, entering his room and looking through his small entertainment center. I found nothing but clothing in the cupboard where he had told me he had housed the video. I started to feel as if I were very drunk on alcohol and tore the clothing out of the cupboard without reservation, throwing it all around his room, quickly losing most of my control over my motor skills, but finding no video. I returned empty-handed to the basement, feeling as if I were sobering up on my way down the stairs, to find Jay in an almost trance-like state. His eyes were dilated beyond belief, and I just ate the remaining Hot Pocket, Jay deciding he wasn't very hungry after all. The drunken feeling had mostly passed, leaving me feeling as if I were only mildly inebriated. He kept saying, "Oh God, this is going to be big," and I told him I didn't feel anything except a slight feeling of lightheadedness, such as I feel after a moderate amount of alcohol, and felt gypped. He said not to worry about it, that I would feel something soon enough. He was quiet for a while. I was starting to think it would never kick in, that I was just going to feel slightly drunk all night. So I stood up to get on the couch, next to the love seat, perpendicular to it in fact, when I realized that, yes indeed, I was feeling something new. As the bottom of the world seemed to drop out from under me, the room melted for a moment as my vision struggled to keep up with my eyes. Standing up felt like it took forever. It seemed I was swimming out of myself and my body had to catch up to where I was. I wasn't prepared for this and quickly sat down on the couch, disoriented, confused, and breathing heavy. I told Jay that I wasn't sure that I was entirely sober, an understatement to say the least, and he just nodded. His face locked in a grim expression I had seen on him once before in the middle of an acid trip. He told me he was really burning up, and I saw that his face was awfully red. With his light blonde eyebrows, I swore up and down to him that he was starting to look like an Oompa Loompa, which confused him and amused me to no end. He wouldn't stop talking about how hot he felt and that he was on fire, and him talking about his high temperature made me notice my own feeling of being very warm. I told him as coherent a sentence as I could muster, which, in retrospect, wasn't all that coherent, that perhaps the Vicodin he was on for his knee was attributing to his high body temperature, which he seemed to acknowledge and accept. He stopped worrying about burning up, and so I was able to ignore my own high temperature as well. We sat there a while, just looking at each other, but not entirely recognizing each other. This is a hard concept to wrap my head around, even now, for while I knew this was Jay, and I knew who Jay was, this person in front of me, at the same time, wasn't Jay, and yet I knew he wasn't a threat, and acknowledged it must be Jay after all. He looked as if he were very far away from me, as though I were viewing him from across the room, and at the same time, he looked as though he were much too close to me. Jay asked me to return to the floor next to the love seat, because I was in fact too far away from him, and he didn't want to feel abandoned. I complied, but didn't like the floor for some reason. I wasn't entirely sure, and went back to the couch, but without comment or dissent from Jay. The one lamp we had turned on in the living room had a dimmer on it, and we had, as stated earlier, put the lamp on a dim level. After returning to the couch, I dimmed the lamp even more, because it seemed to me it would be a good idea to do so, even though I had no logical reason at the time to think this, other than assuring myself that darkness would feel pleasant at that point in time. After a moment, the light seemed to get brighter by a number of levels on its own accord, and I thought it was perhaps entirely an effect of the drug on my vision or perception, but Jay suddenly looked to the lamp and I said, "So you saw it too," at which he nodded. Almost immediately, the lamp went back to the extremely dim level I had just adjusted it to, and Jay and I looked at each other, a bit confused and shocked. The lamp settled down and stopped playing with itself. I was content for the moment and sat in the dark, looking at things and not knowing exactly where I was, as if everything in this room that had been familiar to me since childhood, Jay being an old friend, was suddenly new and unknown. I lost all sense of time. I had no benchmarks to gauge time by, and I couldn't read the digital clock on the VCR across the room because when I tried to look at it, my vision became blurry or quaked too much to allow comprehension. What felt like hours must have been mere minutes. In fact, at certain points, I was certain that whole years and even epochs were passing by us. At times, I thought everything was moving in slow motion. At other times, I felt as if everything were rushing by me in a blur, while my own body was trapped in an envelope of unmoving time. I'm not exactly a foreigner to altered senses of time. I am, even sober, not good at judging intervals of time. And even when inebriated with alcohol, I lose much of what little time sense I have. And yet the complete and utter foreign sense of time in this state was completely unexpected. I think that this complete perversion of the time sense was perhaps the most interesting aspect of the drug. There was no noise in the house. We had neglected to put on any music. If I ever do DXM again, I will definitely put a CD in the stereo. And yet I recall there being no silence at all. I can remember very few certain sounds, and yet I remember plenty of sounds ringing through my ears. I heard a voice at one point hissing something above my head, sort of a sa, sa sound, which I took to be an alien language. Oddly enough, I didn't find it unusual to be hearing alien languages streaming to me from vacant space, though I think I tried to mimic the sound for Jay unconvincingly. Soon I started getting very nervous. I was convinced I would never get out of this frame of mind, and I was worried about how I was going to function in life with my head all jumbled up as it was. I started to get very scared, to the point of breaking out in a cold sweat. I didn't want to be like this, especially not for the rest of my life. I wasn't prepared for this journey and realized I was in way over my head, and I started to despair. I then noticed that this was illogical thinking. I said to myself, if you keep thinking like this, you're going to ruin your experience with all this negativity. So I made myself stop thinking about the end of the experience and just enjoy the now of it, which worked surprisingly well, as I almost immediately felt near euphorically happy. Then I noticed that the whole room was rocking, as if we were below decks on a large boat in the ocean. The fact that Jay's father is an avid deep-sea fisherman and as a consequence decorated the basement in nautical motives surely did nothing to defeat this feeling, perhaps even generated it, from the clock shaped like nautical steering wheels to a large mounted swordfish on the wall. I told Jade that we were on a large boat, conveying almost all of my experiences throughout the night to him, or that it felt that way, but he wasn't saying much by this point, just lying with his eyes closed. I hadn't closed my eyes by this point. I realized now that he was probably enjoying the cinema of his mind, and in fact did not close my eyes until much later into the night, and a few times thought, incorrectly, that he had fallen asleep. The boat went on rocking for a while, and suddenly I told Jay that I was going to go vomit, and he said he thought that would be a good idea for him as well. It's an odd thing, knowing that you're going to be sick in a little while, and yet not feeling sick at the moment. And yet I knew that I should vomit, that I would benefit from vomiting, so I made plans to do so in the near future. With this in mind, I stood up and started walking towards the bathroom, noticing the peculiar feeling of my body's movement. I felt as if gravity were increased for me, or that I was under deep water pressure. At the same time, the movement was intensely pleasurable, and I found I enjoyed just swinging my arms and dancing a bit. I cannot even describe how this felt accurately. It was as if my body would move, and then my spirit would catch up to the point in the physical realm to which my body had moved. Walking to the bathroom was a very difficult maneuver, mainly because my perception of distance was completely and utterly unreliable by this point. Objects a mere foot away from me might seem to be a world away, and objects further away seemed to be uncomfortably close. I would take one step and seem to move a mile, and then take another step and seem to go nowhere, coupled with the fact that I had moments where what I saw through my eyes seemed, to me, to be a movie on a distant screen. I found that walking to a destination seemed at the time to be a wholly remarkable feat of will. Eventually, I made it to my rather unremarkable destination, the tiny basement bathroom, and having finished my nasty spot of business, and Jay having finished his, we sat in silence in the bright lights of the vanity, looking at the floor and remarking in various sarcastic tones, "Well, that was pleasant." I told him I thought I was all better, that everything was over, and indeed, for a few moments I thought that everything was over, that I was sober. And then I opened the door to the hallway, and it was pitch black. I looked down the hallway, saw the couch I wanted to sit on, and saw an expanding distance between me and that couch. As I stood there, my head hanging out of the bathroom into the hallway, I watched the living room speed steadily away from me, the hallway stretching and stretching until it looked nearly infinite. At the same time, it seemed as if the hallway took on a sharp downward angle, so that I was looking down a nearly infinite pit, and that the living room was something to fall in and tumble through a void. "Fuck," I told Jay. "I guess I was wrong about that sober thing." I don't remember the walk back to the couch, or the next bit after I made it to the couch, but after a short while I went and threw up again, and so did Jay. Again, we were in the bathroom, Jay sitting on the sink, and me sitting on the floor near the toilet, with it being much too bright in the room. My sensitivity to light was much like how one might experience being jarred from a deep sleep in the pre-dawn hours by someone turning on their bedroom light, but neither one of us willing to turn off the light for some unspoken and unknown reason. After a few moments, though we both felt like we had been in there for days, weeks, or years, I once again opened the door to the hallway. I once again don't remember any of the walk back to the couch, but once there, Jay asked, as if I felt we had just been explorers, and remarked that he was amazed we made it so far. I felt the same way, that we had covered immeasurable distances and wrestled with impossible difficulties to get to the living room. I agreed that we had just been explorers, going through uncharted territory and barely escaping. It seemed that in the short time it must have taken us to get to the bathroom to the couches, being not more than 20 feet apart, we had shared a very real and distinct hallucinatory experience that neither one of us could recall except in fragmented, unclear bits of dim memory. I got it in my head, however, that we had just trekked across Mount Everest and started feeling very, very cold, thinking I must have gotten frostbite on the mountain because I was wearing only slacks and an undershirt. Jay got me a blanket, and once I had it over me, I felt very, very hot. I was better than cold, though, so I just sat there happily, smiling at everything, thinking about how nice it was to be alive, and how wonderful it was to be on this alien planet, as I was now convinced I was no longer on Earth. My mood was incredibly positive. Everything seemed fine, even though at the same time I was in what I took to be a completely foreign environment. The unknown held no threat for me. It was just a reason to be happy because everything was fine. I was grinning like an idiot. Jay decided it was a good time to turn on the television, though I wasn't sure of that, my sensitivity to light being what it was. I noticed, too, that on the way back from our second trip to the bathroom, that one of us must have turned on the overhead light in the living room, a very bright and harsh light to begin with, an even more harsh light under the circumstances. I remarked to Jay that it needed to be turned off now, and it was turned off, though I don't recall either one of us getting up to operate the switch. Jay got up to get the remote for the television. I started thinking that I was in the acid trip scene from the film SLC Punk, and I was watching the two characters in the scene talk, and I was nodding at what they were saying, even though I wasn't paying attention to them. Then I realized my eyes were closed, so I opened them, and the television was on. I couldn't keep my eyes on the television. They just simply refused to look at it and slid downwards so that I was looking at the bottom of the entertainment center that housed the television. I told Jay I couldn't watch TV, that it hurt my eyes, and that I was seeing double anyways. And indeed, I was seeing double of everything. And so I just watched Jay for a while, both of him, staring at the television, which confused me because the television hurt me. Why not him? I decided to leave Jay to his television stupor and turned to watch the column in the room. His living room is, as stated, in the basement, and in the center of the room is a pole used to support, I presume, the upper level of the house. It is wrapped in a blue and white striped nylon rope, and the effect is not unlike a red and white barber's pole. I had a fun time looking at it because the swirling pattern seemed to be revolving and melting at the same time, and I just watched it, not telling Jay about it because it felt as if it was a private show for me. After a while, the melting pole seemed too much to handle. I took to just closing my eyes and opening them, each time feeling as if I was waking up from a long-age sleep, never actually sleeping though. I felt as if I was always in that moment of haze upon waking up in the middle of a dream, that smoky, muddy feeling of being half awake. I was very entertained by this and was overjoyed by it for a while. Jay was flipping through the channels, but none of the data flowing from the television was registering with me, though I do remember at one point seeing an actor from SLC Punk in a movie on the TV, which amazed me because just moments before I had been imagining I was in SLC Punk. What a coincidence, I thought, but I still had a hard time looking at the television, so I gave up trying and instead spent a considerable amount of time trying to read the VCR's clock, failing horribly. I kept making Jay read the time to me because his vision wasn't as affected as mine was. I spent the time just stretched out on the love seat, and for a while I felt and saw everything in the room become compressed into a one-dimensional plane, a very convincing and pleasurably unique yet hard to relate hallucination that ended much too quickly. Around 5 a.m. or so, by Jay's account, my time sense was still completely out of whack, and I was wondering how it was possible it was even the same day as, let alone mere hours after, the ingestion of the pill. Jay said it was probably time to go to bed, and I grabbed a sleeping bag and we headed up to his room. I made myself a place to sleep on his floor, and he got up to his bed and fell asleep right away. Not me though, for now. In his almost entirely dark room, I was seeing what appeared to be geometric patterns composed of pure energy flowing in front of my eyes, forming what looked like electronic circuits and spilling out what I took to be alien alphabets that I could not read, but loved for its aesthetic properties all the same. I noticed in retrospect that much of my experiences that night I attributed at the time to belonging to an alien, extraterrestrial source, from the alien planet I thought we were on, to the alien voice I heard, to the alien alphabets I saw in my visuals in the dark. I watched these for what seemed to be quite a while, sometimes with my eyes open, and sometimes with my eyes shut, and sometimes my eyes blinking rapidly or slowly. Then I noticed his window. There was a bit of moonlight streaming in through it, but the curtains were drawn, and so it was just an ethereal, white square floating in the void. I moved my head around for a good while, watching this white square leave trails of light throughout his room, and then I fell quickly into a deep sleep, around what I estimated at the time was around 5:45 a.m. to 6 a.m., but could have been 5:01 for all I really know. I woke up at 2:30, feeling parched and foggy in the head, but amazingly happy. I headed home as Jay was expecting company. Upon writing down an initial report of my experiences 2 hours later, I still felt splendid. Everything seemed a bit unreal for me for the remainder of the day. My head felt a bit fuzzy on the inside, as if I were mildly yet pleasantly hungover. I fell asleep at 8:30 p.m., slept for a few hours, and awoke feeling completely sober, but still very, very happy and refreshed. Friends of mine who I talked to after this kept asking if I was high. Such was my giddiness. No, I assured them, I had just had an exciting weekend. And so my first psychedelic experience was a pleasant and exciting surprise. Despite some initial fear at a total alien state of mind and some difficulty coming to terms with the strange inebriation I found myself thrown into, the trip as a whole was interesting, if confusing. I have since been told that 500 milligrams is a doozy of a first-time dose, but I feel it was a fine amount. But on the other hand, I had read up on DXM, had talked to people about it, and expected to be overwhelmed, and expected to have to remind myself that I was on a trip so as to avoid fear. Alright, so this report is a pretty well described first time trip that for the most part seemed to sit well with Johnny Z and his buddy Jay. They experienced a lot of classical dextromethorphan effects, with a solid portion of it being pretty strong and vivid as well. But for those of you who don't know, let's break down some of the facts of dextromethorphan before we start going through their trip. So if you don't know, DXM is a common ingredient found in cough suppressant and cough and cold over-the-counter medicine. Now while it will work for a cough, it is also possible to find recreational effects on it similar to other dissociatives. And what's dissociative? What does that term mean exactly? It cuts off certain associations with your reality. With DXM, it's common to feel numb up to the point of losing your vision. Now, it will depend on the user's physical makeup as well as the dosage, which dosage will vary the experience greatly. The experience is often described as having 4 different plateaus. In this report, we can assume a solid second plateau was reached. The second plateau is regarded as the most recreational most of the time, which users often can find themselves in a drunk-like state. Emotions are often strongly swayed. There's solid dissociation happening. Normally it's mostly bodily, but users can find strong visual and cognitive dissociation as well. Now normally, not everyone's going to enjoy it. It's reported that DXM has 3 different reaction types. This would be based off that you're going to love it, you'll feel neutral about it, or you'll hate it. Which I think this partially depends on your perspective and how you overall react to the dissociative effects. I personally like to think that a solid second plateau is a mix of being kind of drunk, stoned, and kind of like you're rolling. DXM does impact the serotonin system, so it makes sense to experience something similar to that. And there is also the possibility of it being somewhat trippy at that stage, but I think your set is going to heavily impact that. Now looking at this report, it's detailed well with some of the descriptions. I do find it interesting that these two were able to get a hold of pure DXM, but still experienced nausea and had some bathroom trips. Oftentimes, nausea is thought to be attributed to the extra ingredients found in over-the-counter medicine, but based off this report, that wouldn't necessarily be true. And we can see that the environment played a huge role throughout this experience. There was a strong sensitivity to light especially, but there was also solid spiritual hallucinatory effects when he mentioned the aliens, which I would come to expect these to be more common on third plateau experiences, but it hasn't been the first time such hallucinatory states have been achieved at the second plateau, which we got 2 reports that we're going to compare to this one. The first one is not too far off of a dose, which it's My First Encounter with DXM by Alexander, in which he consumed 400 milligrams. Now Alexander describes entering this strong hallucinatory place, similar to the Matrix. Among this, he also describes being very photosensitive to light, had trouble with nausea, and had to use the bathroom a few times, and also that he felt like a ghost when he walked around, which it's probably a similar effect Johnny Z had when they went to the bathroom, the dissociation of seeing yourself in third person, or at least a halfway point of that. But I'd say the biggest difference though is that Alexander listened to music and was heavily influenced by the sound in his trip. Not to say that Johnny Z wasn't, but it may have been influenced much differently if they had done so. Now the other trip I want to bring up is the last Dextromethorphan report, which is The Best Medicine for Opiate Withdrawals by Janney. And the only reason I really want to bring up this is to further show the relationship between DXM and opiates, which in this report we can see here that Jay experienced adverse effects most likely because he was on a painkiller, hydrocodone. Now when you combine dextromethorphan with an opiate, the tolerance of each goes down, which this most likely explains his heat episode he experienced, and that's what may have made his trip even stronger and made him even less likely to engage in physical movement. Likewise though, if used after the fact of using opiates for a while, it can reduce the symptoms of any withdrawal effects there might be. So in a way it can be a danger, but also an aid. But other than that, Johnny Z, though he experienced some rough patches in its experience, seemed to have a solid trip as he naturally enjoyed the highs of the experience really well, and he did a good job describing the effects of a second plateau DXM trip. So if you guys enjoyed this and want to see more on DXM or any other substance, let me know below in the comments and we can get to that. If you guys did like this video, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, follow the socials. It's been someone that's no one, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.